Welcome everyone to today's webinar on the topic of health and hygiene. So we're going to start firstly by acknowledging and paying our respects to the traditional custodians of the country we meet on today, and we pay tribute to them and their elders both past and present, and to future leaders. And we welcome all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. So my name is Vanessa Alexander, and I will be co-facilitating the webinar today with my colleague Maureen O'Donnell. So Maureen and I are going to be taking it in turns, facilitating the session, as well as responding to comments in the text box. And it's great to see so many people already doing that. It's great. I am one of the Positive Partnership team leaders, and I'm based in South Australia. And Maureen is also one of the team leaders. She's based in Victoria. Now, we'll also have Linda Hunt, who is one of our Queensland-based team leaders, assisting us with some of the technical support. So before we get started today, we're going to run through a few of the features of the webinar system. So we know that for some of you have already participated in one of our webinars, so this might be all very familiar, but for those of you, this may be a new experience. So there are just a few tools that you can access that we are going to explore now. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you should see your name. And looking now to the bottom left-hand side of the screen, you will see an icon of a person. So you can click on that and that will bring up a menu for you to change your icon if you would like. So there's things like a cup of coffee, a little cup there and a smiley face, etc. So you can change your icon if you would like. Just above that icon is a text box. So throughout the webinar, you can type questions or comments into the text box. And there may be times that we ask for comments or feedback or ask questions, so it would be great to hear from you throughout the webinar. So if you could please ensure that the speaker icon on your screen has a red cross, and the audio line will also be on mute. If we have time at the end, we'll be able to open up the phone line to answer questions and talk with you. It depends on how we get through the content today. So there may be times during the webinar that I'll be asking you to share your thoughts or experience, like I said. And like I said, it's great to see so many people already there doing that. So hopefully we can sort out those technical problems there for you. There, Katie, yep. Right, so we know that we have a diverse group participating today, including parents, teachers, family members and professionals. Some of you may be individuals on the autism spectrum as well. So we just want to do a gentle reminder to be mindful that a webinar is quite a unique learning experience, and it's different to learning and sharing face-to-face. So we encourage you to give yourself this hour to be present and focused. We know how easy it is to get distracted, so we encourage you to make the most out of this opportunity. At times during today's webinar, there may be moments of silence as well, and that's just for you to be thinking and reflecting on what has been said, and that's okay. So whilst we may not be able to answer all questions and find all solutions in this area of health and hygiene in the session, we will do our best to show a range of different strategies and supports. So within all of the Positive Partnerships model, we don't come from that expert perspective, but what we try to do is look at the knowledge and ideas generated by you as a group and share information and evidence-informed research and tools, and then look at how that may be applied to your own sort of situation. A link to the recording of this webinar will be available in a couple of days' time, so we will email that to you once that's available so you can access this recording again at another time. Also, just a quick note that if we are talking about particular resources or website links, we're going to email those all to you as well, so you don't have to be making notes while you're listening to the webinar. So we'd love to know a little bit more about you. I'm just going to put up a poll in just a moment relating to your role and how you're attending today. So when that comes up in just a moment, it would be great for you to indicate on the poll what capacity you are attending. Okay, so we've got lots of parents and carers with us. A couple of school staff and other professionals, individual on the spectrum as well. So welcome to everyone. It's also great for us to know where you're joining us from. So Linda is going to be putting up another poll in just a moment regarding which state or territory you're calling in from or joining us from today. Should be coming up. Yep, there we are. You're all very speedy with this. That's great. So quite a few from New South Wales, a couple from Queensland, Victoria. It's really wonderful to have so many people join us today. I think that's the beauty of the webinar experience, having that access to so many, for so many people. We know that some of you may have also registered on behalf of a group of people. So if you've got time to please type into the text box now if there are other people joining you. So you may be sitting around a table in the school and there might be 3 or 4 others or more. So if there's a group of you, we would love to hear how many people are joining us. Yeah, that's great, Angel. It's lovely to have this opportunity. Okay, this one. Okay, so if you're looking at the screen now, we're going to just briefly go through some of our learning intentions for today. So what we're aiming to do is to explore some of the unique characteristics of autism and some of the possible impacts that might have on health and hygiene. We're also going to be discussing some of the natural stages of child development and looking at that in relation to individuals on the spectrum. And really importantly as well, we're going to be sharing strategies, resources and information with each other. So we often find that it's parents and professionals and individuals on the spectrum sharing their life experience that's so valuable and important too. So we're looking forward to having a lot of sharing today. So it's important at this point to clarify that today's webinar is focused on general health and wellbeing. So we're not focusing on medical health such as seizures or gut-related conditions or biomedical health. So although we know that that can be a really important area for some individuals on the spectrum and overlap with some of these broader areas of health and hygiene, we just want to point out that's what we're going to be doing. We also want to highlight that the area of sexuality is something that we're working on as a separate webinar. We've kind of recognised and acknowledged that that's a whole new specialist area. So we're not going to be delving into that today, but watch this space because we're certainly looking at doing more of that into the future. So what we're going to do now is start by defining health. So we have a Wordle that's come up on the screen there that covers some of the key areas that many people think of when we say the word health. Sorry about that, that's where I work. So according to the medical dictionary definition, health is a relative state in which one is able to function well physically, mentally, socially and spiritually in order to express the full range of one's unique potentialities within the environment in which one is living. So if we think about that definition, and certainly all the words that are up there on the Wordle, we know that this is a really big area. And so today our focus is really on more of the physical and social aspects of health. So whilst we're not exploring spirituality in this webinar or mental health specifically, we do want to highlight that on the Positive Partnerships website, we do have some useful fact sheets and further information about mental health in particular. So building on that definition of health, if we now look at defining hygiene, again, according to the dictionary definition, hygiene is the conditions and practices that serve to promote or preserve health. So we see that they're closely really aligned. So why are health and hygiene areas of interest and concern to those supporting young people on the spectrum and young people themselves? And what can be done to further support people in this area? So that's really what we're going to be hoping to explore further in our session. So to look at health and hygiene from a practical point of view, we're going to focus our discussion on the following areas of sleeping, eating, physical health, or activity, I should say, and personal hygiene. So I'm going to ask you now to please type into the text box which of these areas are of interest or concern to you and the young person that you're supporting. We've got to get a bit of insight into these are some of the commonly experienced issues that you're supporting your young person with now. Okay, so we've got quite a few So we're on the mark there. So if you're around personal hygiene, yeah, and I agree, Natasha, all really important issues. Great, thank you so much for contributing your insights there. And these are the areas that we're going to be talking a little bit more. So what we recognise that for many of you, some of these issues may fluctuate greatly over the ages and stages. So things that may have been an issue when you were younger, or your child was younger, they may have just developed over time, whereas there may be other issues that have been there for quite some time. So I'm going to start by looking more specifically at the sleeping area, and then I'll hand over to Maureen to take over when we get to eating. So according to the Raising Children Network website, all school-aged children need to sleep between 9 and 12 hours a night. And we know that good sleep has been linked to things like improved concentration, having a stronger immune system, and being happier and healthier. So there's some of those resilient skills as well. They're all some of the things associated when you're getting that good sleep. However, we know that for many young people, they are not getting that recommended hours of sleep. So if you think about your child or the young person that you're supporting, or for people on the spectrum, some of the things you've experienced as well, if you feel comfortable, it would be great to type into the text box what that's looked like for you. Thanks, Elsa. You say your son's lucky to get 8 hours, that's right. And this is going to fluctuate and be different for so many kids too. So it might be, we know that some kids it might be issues around falling asleep or waking up in the night, and that's what we're going to explore a little bit more now. Yeah, and there you go, we're sort of seeing that diversity already, that some kids are already really great sleepers and sleeping that 10 to 11 hours a night, whereas other families have experienced sleeping difficulties right from when their child was born. So we're going to get that diversity, absolutely. So what research tells us is that for young people on the spectrum, they are more likely to experience issues with sleep, and the reasons for these issues will be unique to every individual. So listed on the slide here, we're going to have a little bit more of a deeper look at some of the commonly reported issues for young people on the spectrum. So as I mentioned, the Raising Children Network website is a really great source of information, and there's a couple of fact sheets that we're going to be referring to throughout the webinar, and as I mentioned as well, we'll be sending you links to the specific references so you can read further if you would like. So some of the issues around trouble getting to sleep and then staying asleep, or things around irregular sleeping, and waking patterns. So for example, there may be children lying awake until very late or waking really early in the morning. I think I saw that as one of the comments already from a family saying that their child pretends to be asleep, but they're laying in bed a long time. So yeah, there's lots of great comments there coming through in the text box there. Another issue which might come up is around sleeping much less than what's expected for their age, or being awake for more than an hour during the night. For some young people, it might be getting up and playing in the middle of the night or making noises, which might be to themselves. They may be quite happily doing that, but it's that irregular sleeping patterns throughout the night that can become an issue. So sometimes sleep problems can last for a long time for people on the autism spectrum, and other times they may improve as the children get older. The other point to make here is that if young people are having, or older kids as well, teenagers are having difficulty with sleep, it's also more likely that parents and carers are also going to be having sleep issues, as they may be then getting up in the night to attend to their young person too. So I think for professionals, that can be a really important thing to be aware of when you're supporting families as well. So for young people on the autism spectrum, there are a number of areas that may influence sleep. And if we start thinking about this, we've got the sensory area first. And again, I think I saw a couple of comments about that, around that link with sensory behaviour that parents have already made in the text box there. So if we think about sensory processing and the impact that can have on a young person, that can really impact on the young person's ability to calm and self-soothe, so linked in with those self-regulation skills, and that can have a significant impact on sleep. According to the Raising Children Network, there are a number of other factors to consider. If we then even look at the area of communication skills, we're aware, certainly from our experience, that if a person is having difficulty communicating their needs and wants, or they're feeling like they're not being heard or understood by others, that in itself may keep the young person awake if they're feeling that those needs haven't been met. Even picking up on some of the cues around that it's bedtime and what needs to happen to then work through that routine, that might be an area that for some young people on the spectrum might need help to learn some of those routines. We're aware that many people on the spectrum love routine and might have already established an excellent routine and settling. The issue being that if something comes up to change that particular routine, that can be very distressing. So it's having that awareness about what to do when change happens and things come up unexpectedly. We're aware, certainly from talking with families, that some children in particular may get into the habit of falling asleep in a particular place that's not their bed. So I've known of some families that have said their young person sleeps underneath the bed to start with, or in another area of the house, and then they try and transfer them later in the night, things like that. So habits like that can be really difficult to change for some young people. So that's something to keep in mind. We know that, if you think about your own childhood, you may have had a favourite toy or a blanket that you took to, if you think about your own childhood, you may have had a favourite toy or a blanket that you took to bed that helped you to feel safe and comforted. So that can certainly be the same for young people on the spectrum. I guess the thing to keep in mind is that the association may be very intense, and if the young person can't access that particular favourite toy or blanket, that can lead to high levels of distress. So again, that's something to keep in mind, is around that intensity and how to support the young person. We've identified as well the area of anxiety. So what research suggests is that young people on the spectrum often experience anxiety, and this can make it very difficult for the child to get to sleep. And certainly for adolescents as well, we know that can be a really big concern. So if they're waking regularly, it may be difficult for them to fall back to sleep. Yeah, so I'm seeing your comment there, Bronwyn, about your 13-year-old. So yeah, wakes up grumpy because they're just not getting the right amount of sleep. Yeah, thanks for that. That input's great to hear. We've also identified hyperactivity. And again, in the textbooks, I saw someone comment around ADHD. So yeah, we certainly know from the research that can be an area to consider, that if a young person is hyperactive, and they can be very active and alert right into the evening, so their body's not naturally starting to wind down, so they may need that additional help to be able to do that. We've also identified here medical issues and medication. So again, like all children, some young people on the spectrum may have particular illnesses that they have at particular times, or they may have additional illnesses or conditions such as epilepsy or asthma, and that can also have an impact on sleep. We know that for some young people, if they're taking medication, there may be side effects that include difficulty settling and sleep problems as well. So with all of these possible influences in mind, we're now going to look at some further impacts of inadequate sleep. So whether you're a parent, carer, school staff, professional, or a person on the spectrum, we thought that it would be interesting to look at some of these impacts here. So an occupational therapist, her name's Annie O'Connell, she talks about some of the impacts of inadequate sleep in her sleep ability program. So the first kind of area that she talks about is around emotional well-being. So we know that if you're not getting good sleep, that can lead to increased irritability and mood swings. If we're thinking about learning, poor sleep can also impact on things like your attention span, your ability to concentrate. So it can have a really big impact. I'm thinking about a young boy I supported a number of years ago, and certainly in the school environment when he became very overwhelmed, he would fall asleep. That was kind of a sign that he was shutting down. So it was the kind of that significant impact of him not getting enough sleep in the middle of the night, but then also when he was distressed, that's how it sort of showed itself. So, yeah. So if we consider behaviour, poor sleep can also cause excessive sleepiness, or in fact hyperactivity, that case of being overtired. The way that that might show itself in terms of behaviour is that some young people may be more inclined to be aggressive at times, or you may even see self-injurious behaviour as a result of being just so tired. We discussed earlier some of the sensory processing areas that might be impacted by inadequate sleep, and in Annie O'Connell's work she certainly talks about there being a significant link to increased sensitivity and noise. So if we consider that for many young people they may already have a sensitivity to noise, that if they're not getting enough sleep that's going to be impacted further. Lack of sleep may also impact on physical coordination, so things like reaction times and stamina too. What I'm going to ask you to do is think about your own experience. How are you when you haven't had a good night's sleep? How do you feel? And if you consider that for some young people that might be regularly happening, or in fact happening every night, that's something really significant to consider. So we know that setting up positive sleep routines and habits can help all children and young people, and this is no different for people on the spectrum. So we've got a couple of strategies that are popping up now on the screen to kind of which I'll talk to as we go along. So what research tells us is that preparation is key. So giving warning that bedtime is coming, it's approaching. So that might be giving 5-minute warnings or half-an-hour warnings. Setting up regular age-appropriate routines, or looking at whatever works for you and your young person, but trying to be consistent in what routines you do set up. To try and develop positive associations with bedtime routine. So it may be that the child may read for a short period of time or engage in quiet play before the lights go out. So it's not being seen as a punishment that they're being sent to their room or sent to bed. If you're thinking about the environment, things like light and noise may really impact, particularly on young people who have got really sensitivities to those areas as well. I guess my advice would be to involve the young person as much as you can. So by asking those questions, if they're not able to verbalise or communicate clearly what that is, working in other ways to try and establish what's going to be their best way of falling asleep and having a good night's sleep. We've already discussed that for some young people, they may have a favourite toy. One of the suggestions here is to try and increase that to maybe 2 or 3 different things. So if their very most favourite thing goes missing or is broken, there may be other items that may be helpful in calming that young person, so they're not as distressed. So one of the other websites we looked at quite a lot was the Sleep Health Foundation, and they've got some great tips about sleep strategies for children and young people generally. I think that was part of the link we wanted to make, was just looking generally at some of those just good practices and advice. So we're going to share a few that we collected from their site, as well as some other tips that were raised on the Raising Children network to further support this area. So one of the tips was about trying to keep regular sleeping and waking times. We know that even with really young children, if your child's sort of 6 months or older, help them to go to bed and get up around the same time every day. So even on the weekends, trying to keep similar times to school, so we're within 2 hours of each other. So this can really help to get your child's body clock into the routine and a regular rhythm. Another tip from the Sleep Health Foundation was around avoiding daytime naps for older kids. So if your child's 5 years or older, trying to avoid daytime naps. I know as a parent that can sometimes be really tricky, but we know that if they're napping during the day, that it might be more difficult for them to go to sleep at night and to stay asleep. Another one of the tips is about relaxing before bedtime. So if you can encourage your child or young person to relax before bedtime, or get into that regular routine around the story time and things like that, that might really help. For older children, that might be to wind down by reading a book or listening to gentle music or practicing deep breathing. There are apps like the Smiling Mind app. I've got a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old boys, and that's really useful. I've used that with them to kind of get into that routine of exploring mindfulness and deep breathing. Another tip we've got is about making sure that your child feels safe at night. So if your child feels scared about going to bed or being in the dark, avoiding scary TV shows and movies can help to really alleviate some of those fears. So also to check noise and light in your child's bedroom as well. Another tip was around getting plenty of natural daylight during the day. There's some really good ideas here that we encourage you to have a look at. So on the screen are some examples of visual supports, such as a sleep diary to record what is happening at night and how often the child wakes. And this will help to monitor the effectiveness of some of the sleep strategies. And there are some other examples of visual schedules that might help to prepare the young person for sleep. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Maureen, and she's going to take us through the next section around eating.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now we're going to spend some time focusing on the area of eating. For many of us, eating is a pleasurable part of the day, part of our gatherings, part of our celebrations. We not only enjoy the food, but the experience so much that programs like My Kitchen Rules and MasterChef have become part of our regular TV programs and watching. We do have an understanding about food and nutrition and the health implications for us, and we know that food gives our children the energy and nutrients they need to grow and develop. The Raising Children website, which we've referred to several times, provides guidelines for typical development in eating behaviours. For example, the expected age for a child to drink independently from a cup is between 19 and 24 months of age. Typically, a typically developing child is able to eat independently between approximately 18 and 24 months of age, and by 24 months of age we expect a child to have a varied diet. However, many of our young people miss the memo about the importance and pleasure associated with eating food and food experiences. Their childhood may not have proved to be the suggested opportune time to set up healthy eating habits for life. The Raising Children website has a page under Daily Care named Eating Habits, Children and Teenagers with Autism Spectrum Disorder. It provides information on fussy eaters, overeaters, and non-food eating habits associated with eating. It also gives some information about diet as a treatment, but for today we're focusing on the three eating behaviours that are on the slide, looking at daily nutrition and eating habits. Each child and their eating profile will be as unique as they are, and part of the challenge is in gathering an understanding of that child's profile. So if you can just take a moment to put in the text box which kind of eating behaviour is most of a concern for your young person. So lots of fussy eaters. Okay, so restricted diet, non-food eating. Okay, so weight's a concern for some people, and sometimes we're talking about medical kind of components that come into that as well. Okay, thank you. Thanks for sharing those. That really gives us a picture of what it looks like. So let's begin by looking at the fussy eater and the possible contributors to that eating behaviour. So some of the possible reasons are around sensory sensitivities, which seem to be coming up in each of the areas that we're going to be talking about today. Some of the reasons might be that they find it hard to try new experiences and that food is one of those, or they may in fact be preoccupied with one particular kind of food. Self-limiting diets can be a real common feature of autism, and if the young person has a severely limited diet, they might not be getting all the nutrients that he or she needs. The challenge is to try and understand the reason behind the fussy eating, and as I mentioned before, is if you're actually at a high level of concern around this, then certainly you need some people on your team that are part of that and some medical people that are helping guide that. It can be a detective exercise to work out the possible reasons for fussy eating, and it may take some time, but a dietitian who has some understanding of autism may be of assistance to you. And remember that things can change over time, and we might need to revisit or relaunch our detective work. It's really important, as we said, to identify the reason behind the behaviour before actually looking at what the strategy might be. So let's have a look at some of the strategies. Introducing new foods with textures that your child likes, letting your child choose the food, providing a choice between two foods, And for some children, it's about having separate foods on the plate, or indeed it might even be separate foods on separate plates. Disguising foods and starting with small steps. And I'm going to share an example now of a young person that I worked with in early intervention in my one of my past workspaces, and she was about 5 at the time. And she only ate round orange things, which was certainly a challenge. And we were puzzled by the significance of the shape and the colour. However, she was a keen eater and she sat happily to eat at home and at the group program. And Mum became very skilled at creating all kinds of foods to look round and orange. And it was effective but exhausting. So we decided there was a need for some more detective work to get a further insight into her eating behaviours. And Mum noted some additional information that at some days at home she demanded a certain number of foods, for example, 3 pieces of carrot, and she would actually arrange them in a certain pattern before she began to eat them. Mum could actually reload the plate, give her 3 more carrots, and she would do exactly the same. When we looked in more detail and gathered some more information to add to her matrix or her profile, it indicated that transitions were really tricky for her and that the family were currently in times of crisis and stress, and that perhaps this was one space where she felt she had some control. So we started to look more broadly at other fussy eating behaviours and tried some new strategies. Over time, she was wanting to try new foods at the group program, and the colour and the shape seemed to be less important. And once they were introduced at the group program, she would sometimes accept this new food at home. Much of the behaviour resolved over years, and as she matured and had more experiences out of home, the behaviours only seemed to be as evident during periods of change. We put some strategies in place based on colour and shape, and had we just put our strategies in place based on colour and shape, Mum might still be creating and discarding foods to match her needs 10 years on. So some of the strategies that are on the slide certainly may have been relevant for this young person, but it's really about understanding what sits behind it, because if we're putting strategies in place and that's actually not necessarily the reason for the behaviour, it may be a very long, convoluted way to actually find some success. I'd encourage you to look at the sensory processing webinar on the Positive Partnerships website, and it might help provide some insight into possible reasons for fussy eaters. So now let's consider the overeater. Overeating can contribute to a risk of obesity and other health concerns such as diabetes. And according to the Raising Children's website, there could be a number of reasons for overeating, and they pose some great questions to help in building the profile and understanding of the possible reasons sitting behind the overeating behaviour. For example, is there a pattern to the snacking? Is there an obsession with one particular food? Could it be a side effect of medication? Is there an understanding of the mealtime routines? And can they differentiate between thirst and hunger? There could be a number of other possible reasons. If you can think of any others, just add them to the text box now. Okay, Suzanne, so the bits are obviously something of texture for your young person. It might be around that sensory thing. Lettuce and baby spinach, so that's quite limiting, isn't it? Yeah, Suzanne, so you're thinking it might be related to anxiety for your person and interoception issues. Okay, and that sense of not knowing when you're full, when you've had enough. Some great examples, thank you. So let's look at some of the strategies for overeaters. Once again, it's about understanding the reasons sitting behind the overeating behaviour before deciding what appropriate strategies. So here are some of the strategies that might be good options to establish regular meal times, to teach what hungry and full feel like, to provide drinks, to keep snack foods out of reach, and to have backup activities to keep them busy, and perhaps planning physical activities and exploring other ways of meeting the sensory needs. So if we consider that one of the reasons behind it might be about not sure what else to do, then some of these strategies up here might be quite effective in having backup activities, planning physical activities, and if it's really about the unpredictable routine, then maybe that's actually about, what can you put in place in terms of your family life, your daily routine. It's challenging. It's kind of like, where do you start to actually put some of those things in place to see if it makes a difference. There are strategies on the Raising Children website that will actually guide you through a little bit about establishing the routines and teaching about when hungry and full. So now let's consider the eating of non-food items, and this is obviously often a puzzling area and can be quite concerning for families. Some children on the autism spectrum will mouth and eat non-food items, and this may be pica, which is a medical term given to people who eat non-food items and can be quite dangerous. However, there can be many other reasons for non-food eating habits. Some of them are around sensory-seeking behaviour, some might be around an indication of stress and anxiety, and some might be actually as a side effect of medical concerns. Are there any other things that people can think of? If you have a young person, earlier people actually put in that they had young people who were eating non-food items. Any particular things you might think sits behind that behaviour? You might still be in that detective phase. Okay, the texture of meat. And sometimes it is about appearance. Sometimes it's about hot or cold. Young people might be actually quite happy to eat cold things, but they're not so happy with the warm or the hot textures. Okay, so it's actually you've got sort of a pattern that's set up there, Catherine. And pizza is good even if it's cold. Lots of people like cold pizza, don't they? Okay, so some non-fooding items like the nappies and the pencils. Thanks, Fiona. So let's look at some strategies for the non-food eating items. So replacing non-food items with snacks, and we're not suggesting that this is always easy, but it's really just finding some starting points to change some of the behaviours if possible. As we suggested, consulting a paediatrician or a dietitian might be a pathway that you'd like to go down, and teaching if your young person is up to that, teaching them about what are food and non-food items. It's not necessarily an age thing here. It can still be happening with young people when they're much older. So chewing clothes when they're worried. Okay, so, can you think of any strategies that might be effective if it is about a sensory-seeking behaviour? It is about needing those cold things and avoiding the warm or the hot. It's tricky, Fiona, isn't it, in terms of finding people that are actually on the same page sometimes? Okay, so eating when they're being distracted by something else. Yeah, and I guess eliminating things like, is it about teeth, is it about wellness, is it different, is that behaviour different at sometimes than it is at others? Chewing necklaces, yeah. Keeping their hands busy for that activity thing. Okay, so there are a number of possible common strategies that can be effective for all kinds of eating challenges, including the use of visuals, establishing routines, teaching steps, reinforcing the appropriate behaviours, and teaching the science behind a healthy diet if that's actually something that you think your child might be up to. There's also a number of resources on the Positive Partnerships website that could support you in your detective work. So there's a PBS module that looks at what's happening before and after the behaviour, and then puts in place what sorts of things you might consider in teaching of new behaviours, or the environmental considerations. The sensory processing webinar that we mentioned before. There's a tool around reinforcement inventories that can actually reward the behaviours that you're looking for, deciding what that looks like for your child, and then the idea about developing transition plans if that's something that's of concern for your young person, if that's actually perhaps a contributor to the eating behaviours. Okay, I'm going to hand back to Vanessa now, and she's going to talk to us about the physical activity area.
Great, thank you, Maureen. So I'm just going to click over there. So if we're now looking at physical activity, It's recommended that all young people engage in at least 60 minutes of physical activity or exercise a day. So developmentally, we know that physical activity is important for many reasons. So again, referring to the Raising Children website, they highlight some really key points to consider for all young people. So stating that being active every day can help in things like improving your heart health and fitness, developing strong muscles and bones, having good posture, maintaining a healthy weight, etc. So in addition to the physical aspects, exercise can also help with things like improving concentration and memory, learning new skills. So if you're engaging in sports or games, it might be that you're learning those new things there. Also increasing in self-confidence. We know that there's an association in reducing stress and anxiety by engaging in activity. Also opportunities for meeting other people. So there's that social benefit too in terms of engaging in physical activity. Importantly, another strong link is around improving the quality of sleep. So certainly from the earlier part of the webinar when we were focusing on sleep, if that's an issue, that might be something to explore too, about exploring this physical activity aspect. So the flip side is if we're not getting enough physical activity, then that can put the young person at risk for things like being overweight or high blood pressure, anxiety and depression, and also type 2 diabetes. So there's some of the things to consider. And yeah, I agree, Katie, this is one of the tricky things if people aren't interested in socialising as such or are really focused on the screens about how do we try and increase that physical activity side of things and that interaction. So if we look at a bit more detail now at physical exercise or activity through the autism lens, there may be some additional considerations that we may need to make and some potential barriers that could come up. And I think already I've seen a few there in the text box. So if we think about motivation, some young people may not be motivated to participate in organised sport. Or if they're a perfectionist, they may be worried if they can't perfect the activity or sport straight away. We know that for some young people on the spectrum, they may have low muscle tone or difficulty with coordination. So that means that engaging in some of the activities can be really hard. So that's something to keep in mind. If we think about exercise often being based around teams, that can present some of the challenges in terms of social skills. And if the young person on the spectrum prefers activities that are solo, or on their own, that might be their downtime and sort of time to refocus. So activities such as running or walking, swimming, yoga, they're still ways of engaging in activities, just not in that team aspect. We are aware that many young people on the spectrum may in fact be very active and from a sensory perspective need to move a lot to feel just right. So by trying to channel that in a positive way can be really effective. So when supporting a young person to choose activities, considering the sensory environments is really important. So for example, if a young person has a sensitivity to noise, then I'm just using the example of playing basketball in some of the locations I've gone to, when they're in big busy halls where there's really quite bad acoustics and bouncing balls and lots of people around, that can be really stressful with the noise. We've also listed on the screen there around screen time. So we know that that's really challenging in terms of, for all people, I think it's one of those modern day challenges around that interest that lots of people have, not just people on the spectrum, around screens. So the point here is if a young person is really motivated by a screen, can that be incorporated into an interactive activity or a physical activity? So even things like playing Pokemon Go or interactive games like on the Wii, where you actually have to move to play, that might help to get some of that increased physical activity. So there are a number of different activities and sports that may help the young person to engage in more physical activity. And certainly by involving the young person in the process will help to identify what they're interested in, what works for them. So on the screen, we've got a couple of examples up there. So things like swimming or rock climbing might be really great. Some really good ideas there in the text box again around martial arts and also some of the trust craning activities are great ideas. Thank you. We've also got a couple of tips here around things like a choice board. So the reason we've got that up here is for some young people, if you simply say, well, go and play or go and choose something, that's kind of not explicit enough. But if you have a choice board, and that doesn't have to be those board maker symbols. That could be different things like photos or other things that you could have there, that could encourage the person to have a bit of a structure around what they could choose. There are also apps, so we've got one up there on the screen called the Exercise Buddy. So that records what's happening to your body. So for the young people who are really motivated by facts as well and wanting to know what's happening to their heart rate and things like that, that can be really motivating. Similar to smartwatches or other devices such as Fitbits, where you're getting that information that you can then monitor and look at data from. So that's a couple of ideas that we've got there. So I'm going to hand over to Maureen now. She's going to be exploring a little bit more the area of personal hygiene.
Okay, let's start by revisiting the definition of hygiene that Vanessa shared with us earlier. It's the conditions and practices that serve to promote or preserve health. So these conditions and practices are part of areas like medical hygiene, travel hygiene, community hygiene. However, for today's purposes, we're going to focus on personal hygiene, which includes things like bathing, showering, toileting, hand washing, hair brushing and hair cutting, toothbrushing, washing and wearing clean clothes, wearing deodorant, menstrual management, clipping toe and fingernails, food handling, waste management, like throwing away things with germs on them, and using protection, including gloves and condoms. So typically, young children are taught the basics of hygiene at a young age. For example, cleaning teeth, having a bath or a shower, washing hair, blowing noses, washing hands. However, for a number of reasons, this is more challenging or can be more challenging for young people on the autism spectrum. So it might be around sensory sensitivities, it might be about rigidity with routine. So changing hygiene need to be challenging for all young people, but for young people on the autism spectrum, don't necessarily pick up new ways of thinking and behaving from their peers. They don't necessarily pay close attention to the social examples and the subtleties. So it may be about having difficulty understanding the social cues. They may have a lack of awareness of personal odours of themselves and others, or in fact they may have an over-awareness of odours. And it may also be around that capacity to change and to take on that change. So what are the impacts of poor hygiene and why does it matter? Well, as well as helping us stay healthy and being clean and well presented, it's a part of confidence and social skills. Poor hygiene can impact on health and social. We're talking about things like skin infections and risk of isolation, just being two key areas around that. So what can we do about it? There are conditions and practices that help maintain health and prevent spreads of diseases. And the first step is about establishing routines and teaching skills as part of each routine. So let's have a look at some of the strategies about providing the information about the why, the where and the when, about developing routines, about using visuals once again, about teaching specific skills associated with that need, providing reinforcements and rewards. So there's a number of resources available to support the development of skills, and there's lots of free printable behaviour charts on a number of websites that will be part of what we send through to you. On one particular website, I saw some interesting things that I'll share with you in a moment, but on the Raising Children's website, you'll find things around showering schedules, on social stories, video modelling. So for many young people on the autism spectrum, they're strong visual learners, and routine strips and charts such as this hand washing one can teach and prompt the steps and help generalise the skills. This one includes a story that's geared to an older child, and as you'll note, it still includes visuals. And the kind of visuals that we're looking at really depends on what's suitable to the child. So for some people it needs to be a photo, and for others it actually might be a drawing or a symbol of some kind. And the same thing happens when we're talking about younger people too. It might be for some children it needs to be a photo, and for others symbols might actually be relevant. So using your phone to take photos or your iPad, those sorts of things. There's a number of ways that you can provide the visuals. So Suzanne, you've got a visual for hand washing and brushing teeth. Fantastic. So here's one for showering. So typically the routine strips include words and pictures, and left from right in terms of what you can see here. There's a number of great practical suggestions on a number of websites. We've just shared a few with you, but it's worth spending some time exploring. And one of the ones I just mentioned a moment ago that I thought was worth sharing with you that I found on the carautismroadmap.org website, where they looked at conditions for setting up for success in the morning and the night. And they had a morning and a night routine basket, which had a matching visual, and each of the items was numbered in order of the way that they needed to use them. So just some simple ideas that other people have come up with or tried that they found to be successful. So using the young person's interest is more likely to engage them with the visual or with the routine board. And in this schedule, you can see that the young person's interest was on Sesame Street. But if you're looking at creating it for older children or children that aren't into Sesame Street, then it's looking at what to use as those key things that are actually going to get that level of engagement. And undoubtedly, there's a number of things online and downloadable resources. And we would encourage you to actually get the young person involved in the making and creating of those, especially when we're talking about adolescence and the challenges that are coming into that area of hygiene. So Super Mario gets him in the bath. Fantastic. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today, our health and hygiene webinar. We've touched on sleeping and eating, on physical activity and hygiene, and thank you for being so generous in the sharing of strategies and ideas in the text box, because that's the richness of what makes the webinars as good as what they are. As you can see in lots of the areas we've looked at, it's the common areas of the visuals, because we know young people on the spectrum are often strong visual learners and that they require specific teaching of skills. So we're just going to take a moment now to look at the Positive Partnerships website. It offers a range of courses for parents and professionals as well as fact sheets and all of our workshop tools that you can go on and download. Our homepage, which is where you see where parents and carers will be able to register for upcoming workshops, and we're going to show you those in a moment. And school staff must contact their sector leaders to find out about professional learning opportunities. Or you could ask your child's teacher to join us on one of our future webinars. We encourage you to visit our Facebook page. We have over 6,500 followers, and the page includes tips and information regarding supporting school-age children on the autism spectrum. And we want this page to offer evidence-based resources about autism, to inform people about Positive Partnerships workshops, and to act as a forum to share your experiences of autism. And we encourage you to leave comments, photos, videos and links here. So here's a list of the upcoming workshops in November. And just mentioning that the Watara one in New South Wales is actually going to be a weekend workshop, so it's on a Saturday. So we work hard to try and provide flexible options in different locations, and also to look at what can actually increase the likelihood of people being able to access these opportunities. So we just have a couple of minutes before we encourage you to do the survey. If anybody's got any specific questions to pop into the text box, we probably have time to just take a couple of questions and to see whether people have got some contributions in response. Okay, well, if there's no questions, can we just encourage you? There'll be the link to the survey will actually be sent with the email, but there's the link in the text box now. If you click on that, that will actually be up for about the next half an hour, and you'll be able to fill in the response on the survey. And we would really appreciate you taking that. That's actually what helps us build and create further webinars. So still some great suggestions coming in around water intake. Okay, about the challenges, questions around the challenges to do with puberty.
Vanessa,
so anybody got any? Thanks,
sorry.
Vanessa.
I was going to say, there was a question earlier from Bronwyn as well around her 13-year-old around issues with, I guess, wetting their pants or not wanting to change or bathe unless told to. So I guess my initial thought that might be something to worth investigating with an OT around whether or not they're feeling the urge to go to the toilet in time. A couple of parents had commented earlier around interoception, so that's an area we're knowing is really growing in the research in terms of thinking that for some young people, particularly on the spectrum, that they may not be registering some of those internal states that they need to go or that they're hungry or thirsty and those sort of things. I'm thinking that may be something to investigate and certainly to explore some of the motivation as to why they don't want to bathe. Not that helps, but I'm thinking that might be some of the things to look at.
Bob, and it may be worth exploring the sensory part of this too. So perhaps, I'm not sure if you have an OT on board, but often they have a real understanding around the sensory kind of needs of the child and whether they're undersensitive or oversensitive to some of those, I guess, areas that you have concerns over and what can be supporting that. So if we have no other questions, thank you so much for your participation today. Vanessa, Linda and I thank you for being here and a part of it, and we hope it's been useful to you from here and further in your journey.